Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence in starting and growing your business. My guest this week is David Horne. David is the founder of Add, Then Multiply, the consultancy that helps entrepreneurs achieve exponential growth. David has raised over £100 million, been involved in around 24 acquisitions, and once helped a business grow 25 times in just 3 years. He's also the author of the award-winning book Add, Then Multiply, and the founder of Funding Focus, the social enterprise tackling the startling inequality faced by female and underrepresented founders when raising capital. As always, though, I asked David about the early influences that shaped him, and he went right back to where it all started, with the job just as his teenage years were getting going.
So I had my first job, I think I was 12, 11, 12, somewhere around that area. And I had a paper round, which I really enjoyed and did for several years. And it was interesting after I'd been doing it for about 18 months. And in Canada, the paper rounds are different to the UK. So in the UK, you go down to your local news agent and you pay them money and your paper comes and it usually arrives around 8 o'clock in the morning. In Canada, you have to deliver the papers before 7 a.m. and you go around once a month and collect money from the customers. And I really enjoyed that side of it, much more than getting up at 4:30 in the morning to deliver newspapers. And one day, when the newspaper manager came around to my house to collect the money that I owed from the collections I had done, he said, "Do you like the collection?" And I said, "Yeah, it's my favorite part of the job." He said, "Well, look, we've got several other newspaper rounds where the kids aren't very good at collecting money. How would you feel about collecting for them and you just take a commission off the money you raise?" And I thought, fantastic. I ended up giving up my paper round and doing collections for 3 or 4 different rounds. And it was a much more sociable time, early evening going out collecting the money. And I loved doing it.
Hang on, so were you just very much more effective at collecting the money, and so they thought it's worth a
I was.
commission because
I was.
because he'll bring the money in?
And it was funny because it was things like, when the area manager came around to collect the money, it was all ready. It had all been counted out. All of the dollar bills were smooth, and the Queen's head was facing the same way. And I was a geeky anorak in that area. But I guess an early sign that kind of a career in finance was relevant. And the other early thing, and this goes even earlier, it wasn't a job, but when I was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, playing any kind of a game where there was a banker role, all of my friends said, "Will you be the banker?" So I don't know what it was, but yeah, it was just something that was in my blood. And then I got offered a job working in a butcher shop. So I did that for a few years. And then I decided in my later years of high school, I decided that I was going to do a career in banking. And I got a job with the Royal Bank of Canada in the summers between my university courses. And that was all going really well. And I connected in a particular branch and was spent 2 years in this particular branch. And at the end of the second year, the branch manager called me into a meeting and said, "Look, we're in a recession. They've frozen the management training hires. I'll give you a job as a bank teller, David." But he looked at me and he said, "But you didn't go to university to be a bank teller, did you?" And I didn't know what career advice was back then, but that was the first piece of career advice anyone ever gave me. And so I went to the campus recruitment office, and the accounting firms were doing their milk run in about 3 weeks' time. So I studied up on all the different firms. I had 2 friends whose dads were chartered accountants, and I went and met with them, and they were so different. One of them was a real accountant's accountant. He was actually the chief accountant of the university. And the other one was an entrepreneurial guy who was in property development and lots of things. And I thought that sounds, like a really good foundation, a great set of skills. And I ended up getting a job with Price Waterhouse, now part of PwC, and qualified with them. And then in 1987, when I qualified, I got a job offer. I had said to the firm I wanted to work in a German-speaking office because I'd learned German at school and studied it at university. And one day I went into work and this is back in 1987, there was a telex from Price Waterhouse in Zurich offering me a job. And so summer of 1987, my wife and I had been married 4 years. So we sold off what few possessions we had, packed our clothes into 4 suitcases, got on board an airplane with one-way tickets and a 2-year employment contract. And that was 38 years ago.
Wow. So, I mean, summer 87, I mean, I joined in my first job also in sort of banking. It's summer 87. Of course, October 87, all hell broke loose,
It
with the
certainly did.
financial market crash. So did you suddenly think, not only does this sort of fit with my numerical skills and how my friends perceive me in this way, but actually it's exciting with all this up and down movement. I mean, is that how you were feeling or yeah?
Exciting and slightly terrifying. I still remember where I was when the news of that crash hit. I was at my biggest client that became my future employer a couple of years later. And I was in their treasury department, and they had the stock market screens up on the wall, and it was late afternoon in Zurich because of course it was like 9, 10 a.m. in New York, and just everything was going red. I remember that so clearly.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, I remember 'cause my very first day was actually a day of, there's a famous hurricane in this country, the
Yes.
Friday before,
The,
and so the
the one
markets were
that the
closed.
one that the weatherman said wasn't going to happen, Michael Fay.
That's the one. And of course people forget about that they were so closely linked because the markets were closed on Friday. So when they opened on Monday, it was even worse than it otherwise would have been. But so there
Yeah.
you are. You're on your sort of big gig in sort of Zurich, that you're doing. I mean, after things like the crashes, I mean, what unfolded then? And at this stage, were you just thinking, that's it? This is the area that I'm in. I mean, did you have little entrepreneurial green shoots appearing for yourself or not at that stage?
At that stage, probably not. I'd had them when I was younger, and then when I joined PW, I'll just call it PwC now because everybody knows that. So when I joined PwC, I felt like I was into something that was really big. And then this client that I was at was the US tech hardware company called NCR, and they were my biggest client in Switzerland. And we had audited them for 2 years, and there had been a fraud in their finance department that the internal audit people found. And then as the external auditor, I got called in and worked with them on it. And they brought in a guy from the UK to become the financial director on a temporary basis. And they hired a Swiss guy to be the financial controller, knowing that the UK guy was going to come back. And so I had been auditing them for 2 years, and this thing happened after the first year. So the UK guy and the Swiss guy were running it, but they knew that the UK guy was going back and the Swiss guy was going to become the financial director. And I remember it was the audit exit meeting at the end of 2 years. So we were in the managing director's office, and it was the managing director, the UK guy, and the Swiss guy, and it was the audit partner from PwC and me. And we finished all the formalities of the business. And then the managing director looks at me, then looks at the audit partner and says, Stephen, that was his name, and then looks back at me and doesn't take his gaze off me. He says, Stephen, I think it's time that PwC played a more active role in helping us to find our next financial controller. Right, gentlemen, the meeting's over. Let's go to lunch. David, would you like to ride in my car? And they offered me the job in the car on the way to the restaurant.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So how long were you there for then?
In Switzerland, a total of 6 years, 2 years with PwC and 4 years with NCR. And then I moved with NCR to the UK.
Okay, all right. So time rolls on. You're developing your career, and then in the CV that I sort of have, sort of on LinkedIn, I see that in 2002 you founded and then Multiply. But was there something in between,
Yeah,
or did it
so
just
I mean,
happen
I,
out of the
I
blue?
stayed I stayed in big blue chip corporates until the end of the 90s. So I was with NCR in the UK, and during that time, NCR had been acquired by AT&T. So I moved to a division of AT&T, and then that division got sold. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to find a job. I ended up doing a 3 year stint at the BBC, which was interesting. I love the BBC as a broadcaster and as a national treasure of the UK. But as an organization, it and I were not meant for each other. And so I engineered my redundancy at the end of 99, thinking I was going to get a job with a .com. Thankfully, I didn't, because that whole house of cards was about to fall down. But I ended up being the European CFO of an American PR agency group that was expanding into Europe. And the guy who they had just bought an agency in London, and the guy who was the head of that was the European chairman, Tim. And I joined as the European CFO, and Tim and I had a brief to build an agency network through acquisitions. And we had New York's checkbook. So we went out and bought 7 agencies in a 2 year period. And then in the summer, that would have been 2000 and 2001, And in the late summer of 2001, our parent company got acquired by Interpublic Group, one of the behemoths of the marketing service agency group world. And we got merged into their PR brand, which was called Weber Shandwick. And Weber Shandwick already had a European CFO, and they were like 100 times our size. So I was given a paycheck and shown the door. And I, at that stage, I thought, well, I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to turn 40 years old in 2002. I'll launch my own business. And so that's when I founded Add Then Multiply. And I did kind of consulting work for about a year. I ended up being called back to the PR agency because there were a few things. We had done 7 acquisitions and they'd fired me and they'd fired Tim. And all of a sudden they couldn't get the audit done because things had happened and nobody knew what was going on. So I ended up doing a lot of consulting and helping them get their audit through.
So you started up your business, you were doing a bit of consulting, and then where did the name, just for listeners who maybe don't know it, why Add Then Multiply? What was that all about?
I have a very good friend who's a branding specialist. He used to work for Interbrand and stuff like that, and he helped me to come up with the name. We were playing around with logos and stuff, and I had this little logo that another friend of mine had created that was a combination of a plus sign and a multiple sign. Interestingly, when he gave it to me, it was just an 8-pointed star. And then my friend David looked at this and kind of pulled it apart and said, add, then multiply. And I liked that because it was a concept that I could get on with. And it was also, I've always been a bit of a, kind of playing on the edges thing. And it broke a mathematical rule because if you think back to your high school maths, you always do the multiplications before you do the additions. And
Right.
so add, then multiply was just a little bit edgy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
when I started using the name, people thought, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, and back then, so you set up a business, and you had a name, and you were doing a bit of consulting. I mean, were you thinking, well, actually, this is what I thought it was, or did you have a different idea in mind about what running a business was? I mean, because
I
different
had,
people have different ideas about what that means. Yeah.
I had no idea at the time. I just kind of went out and thought, let's see what happens.
Mm.
And one of the significant, kind of life-changing things that happened was one of my co-directors at the PR agency, who is still a very dear friend today. She's now 82 years old and an absolutely wonderful woman. She was a non-executive director of a FTSE 100 company where the guy who had been the chief executive had moved to non-executive chair and launched a cash shell on AIM with a buy and build strategy. And he bought his first company. And Angela, my friend, met John on one of their board meetings because she was on the board of this FTSE 100 company. And she said, John, you're looking very stressed. Is everything all right? And he said, well, Angela, I've just bought this company and I've realized I need more people to help me. And I'm desperate to find a CFO who understands M&A. And Angela smiled and said, John, I know just the person. So Angela introduced us. And about 3 weeks later, I became the CFO. And John very kindly calls me a co-founder as well, even though he had founded the business. But a CFO and a co-founder of an AIM-listed business called Huvo PLC, which was a digital media and publishing group. And over the next 3.5 years, John and I raised about £60 million in funding, bought 7 private companies, and took over another AIM-listed business. And then I got headhunted to join another AIM-listed company that was an auction business. And John said, "Yeah, that's fine. It's we've done our bit. There's other people that he was able to bring in, and it was all very amicable." So I moved across to the auction business, and John and I still do stuff together 20 years later.
Okay, so I want to drill down on that a little bit there because you've sort of there's all this kind of I'm hearing sort of big amount of money, raise this in funding. A lot of people starting out as entrepreneurs who aren't from your background, sort of their mind would be boggling at the moment,
Yes,
thinking that sounds just incredible. How did he
very.
raise that amount of how did he raise that amount of money? You're
Yeah.
making it sound simple. I mean, what should maybe startup entrepreneurs think about when you want to persuade people to part with their cash in order to fund your business? What sorts of things do you have to prove to them? What sort of hoops do you need to jump through?
Well, yeah, no, and that's a great question. I mean, you need to find the right kinds of investors, and there's a different level and hierarchy of them. I mean, there's bootstrapping, which is your own money. There's friends and family, and then there's angel investors, and then there's venture capitalists, and then it goes up to private equity and public markets, but that's different. But kind of friends and family, angel investors, venture capital are the areas where the money gets raised. For a lot of startup founders, they have this idea in their head, I've got to control everything. I've got to own 100% of the business. I don't want anyone else in there. And that's totally fine, but it constrains their ability to grow because their ability to grow and reinvest in the business is constrained by whatever amount of money they've got to put into it or whatever amount of money they can generate in sales that they can then reinvest in the company. Whereas where they seek investment, then the investment comes in and you can accelerate what you're trying to do, whether that's buying new equipment, whether that's hiring in teams of people, whether that's acquiring another company. It's all about acceleration.
And that's a really important point that you almost have to, as a founder and someone growing a business, you almost have to separate maybe your ego or your sense of control away from that if you're looking to raise significant levels of funding. I guess that's something that a lot of founders really struggle with.
Yes, they do. They do. A lot of them do. And that's actually covered in a chapter in my book, Add Then Multiply. In the book, I set out an example of a company where someone's the founder of a tech business and they've grown it and it's now worth £3 million. And they decide to raise £2 million. So they go out and raise money from an angel investor, and the angel investor comes in, and now the business is worth 5 million because it was 3 million plus the 2 million in cash. So the founder owns 60% of the company and the investor owns 40% of the company. And then they hire a new CTO to help develop the technology they need, and they grant options to the CTO over 5% of the company. So the founder now owns 57%, the investor owns 38%, and the CTO owns 5%. And they double the size of the company. So now the company is worth 10 million because they've executed on a very good strategy and the CTO has developed it and the founder has driven it and won the customers and all that. So the business is now worth 10 million. So the founder's stake of 57% is worth 5.7 million. Whereas when they owned 100% of the company, it was only worth 3. The investor's stake, they put in 2 million and they've now got a stake that's worth 3.8 million. And the CTO, who got the options as part of the recruitment package, has a stake that's worth 500,000. So everybody wins. Mm-hmm. So the founder doesn't own 100% of the company. They don't have complete control. The investor sits on the board and the founder has to get used to that. But the founder has almost doubled their wealth. Mm. And they wouldn't have been able to do that if they hadn't achieved the funding in order to make the investments and hire the people and grow, unless they had access to their own money.
Okay, and I think I'm sure that our listeners will be very grateful for that kind of explanation as to what they need to think about in terms of sort of raising funding. Let's get back, though, to Add Then Multiply. You developed the FACE model, which is, well, you're going to tell me what they are, the four letters, which is central to Add Then Multiply. I mean, was there some sort of aha or breakthrough moment that made you think, yes, this is the framework we want to follow?
Yes, there was a breakthrough moment. I was doing a development program called Key Person of Influence, run by Daniel Priestley. And I invited Dan out for lunch, and we were talking through what I do and how I do it. And Dan picked up a cocktail napkin and started sketching it out. And we worked around and played around with different things. But he said, look, he said, you raise money, you buy companies, you put them together, and you help people sell businesses. So how can we create that into a model? And we pulled it together and it became the FACE methodology: fund, acquire, consolidate, exit.
Okay. So, it's one of those things that an acronym has to spell something, rather than, and FACE is as good as anything. So that's great. And did you then have sort of a particular early or impactful client success story that showed that actually FACE really works?
Well, I was able to refer back to the PR agency, which grew and then ended up being acquired by a much, much bigger company. I was able to refer back to the AIM-listed Huvo PLC, where we can show that the share price, when I got involved, the share price was about 15p. When I left, the share price was 60p. So all of the investors had made money. When I was in the auction business, it didn't quite work out that well. We did a great big acquisition in the spring of 2008. And then did all the integration and came back to the markets in the autumn of 2008 and told the markets that, everything had been done, and anyway, we were all on track, and everything was looking good. And a week later, Lehman Brothers went bust, and the whole global financial crisis came. That company ended up being bought out, but I had left by then.
Is there a particular bit of face that's the most difficult? I mean, for the founders, is it the exit bit, knowing when to get off, or is it something else?
The hardest work is the consolidation bit because you're taking two companies and putting them together. And particular, let's I don't know, let's pick an industry. Let's say you're in a beauty salon business, and you decide that you're going to acquire another beauty salon business, and they're further down the high street from you, or they're round the corner, or something like that. And you've been competing for years, and now all of a sudden you own them, and your staff kind of think on the competitors, ooh, it's them, and their staff think on you as, ooh, it's them, and now you got to put them together. And I actually had that experience in the PR industry when we were bought by IPG and merged in with Weber Shandwick. One of our biggest clients was Fujifilm, and one of their biggest clients was Kodak. And although it was never written, Fuji's unwritten motto was, how do we kill Kodak?
Hmm.
And so you've got these teams, and they were putting out all this marketing communication, and now all of a sudden, oh, we're going to work together and we're going to be friends. So that can be a real challenge. And so oftentimes when I'm advising people on acquiring a company, I say, look at companies that aren't competitors and see if we can find an interesting route to go down. So is there a similar thing, but if we stick with the beauty thing, maybe one of them's a nail salon and the other one's a hair salon, or an aesthetics company or something like that, so that you're not directly competing. Because one of the great opportunities out of the consolidation phase, where you get that 1+1 = 3, 4, or 5, happens when I have a pool of customers in my company and I sell them X. You have a pool of customers in your company and you sell them Y. I can now sell all of my customers Y, and I can sell all of your customers X. So there's a much, much wider opportunity to grow the foundation.
Do you think that, I mean, I've heard it said that a lot of mergers, for example, fail because although the top teams, maybe sort out who's on the board, who's not on the board, and things like that, they don't really go down deep enough into the organization to think
Absolutely,
how it's going to work.
100%. 100%. And my biggest experience of that was when I was at NCR and we were bought by AT&T. And this was in the early mid 90s. And until the dot-com boom happened, the AT&T NCR merger was widely considered to be one of the most value-destroying M&A transactions because you had two companies that had totally different cultures. And yeah, you put them together. I mean, I was with NCR and it was very command and control, very hierarchical, very political. And AT&T was much more, hey, open, we trust you, we love everybody, everything's great. And these two cultures came together and just clashed horrifically. And some of the shenanigans that went on were pretty spectacular.
Right. I want to move on because your career was moving on at this point. In 2019, you founded Funding Focus, and
Yes.
I just want you to talk a little bit about that. And it's all around the issue of funding inequality, and why was that so important for you to tackle that?
So I was speaking at an event in Reading in the spring of 2019, or maybe it was the summer, I can't remember, and about fundraising for SME. And a woman came up to me after my talk and asked why so little funding went to female founders. And I said to her, I have no idea, but I'll find out. And about a week later, I had a meeting with the chief executive of the British Business Bank. She and I had met at an event at the Institute of Directors, and this was just a follow-up thing. So I was in her office and we had a very pleasant conversation. And towards the end, I thought, well, I'll ask her if she knows anything. So I asked, and she kind of smiled and reached down to the bottom drawer of her desk and brought out a research report that the bank had published like a few weeks previously called UK VC and Female Founders. And they looked at all of the VC venture capital deals in the UK in 2017. And they found out that out of every pound of venture capital invested, less than a penny went to female founded teams.
Uh,
About 10p went to mixed gender teams, and 89p went, pardon me, to all male teams.
Okay, so now that is a staggering figure. Now let me play devil's advocate here
Yep.
and say maybe it's because female entrepreneurs maybe tend to set up smaller businesses, or maybe
Yep.
don't need funding as
Yep.
much, or
True.
haven't actually sought it. I mean, but that can't possibly, can it, explain the kind of disparity that you're talking about?
It doesn't. I've done a huge amount of research. For the benefit of your listeners, I'm holding up another book called Funded Female Founders, which I wrote in 2022. No, I mean, it's a complex issue. One of the questions I'm often asked is, well, how many female founders are applying for funding? And in that same research report, where they got less than a penny out of every pound, female founders had submitted 5% of all of the pitch decks. So they were getting through, but they just weren't getting the funding. Mixed gender teams had, so 5% of the decks got less than 1% of the money. Mixed gender teams had 20% of the decks and got 10% of the money. And all male teams were 75% of the decks and got 89% of the money. So that imbalance. And I thought, okay, there's something going on here. And I started to build that out. And I've run a series of events and all of that. And when I was researching the book, I interviewed a lot of businesses. I interviewed a lot of venture capitalists. I looked at all sorts of, I mean, I spent 18 months researching before I wrote the book. And it really boils down in my mind to three main factors. Number one is just inherent gender bias. It's better than it was when I was growing up in the 60s and the 70s, but there is still inherent gender bias. Number two is there is a lack of women in the investment management industry. It's still an incredibly male-dominated industry. And there was a fascinating study that I found by a woman who's now a professor at London Business School. She had done her PhD studies at Columbia University in New York. And for her dissertation, she looked at all of the TechCrunch startup battle pitching competitions in New York City between 2010 and 2017. And she downloaded the videos of all of these competitions into some software, analytical software that's way beyond my technical skills. And it analyzed the pitches and the Q&A sessions. And they found no material difference between the way male and female founders pitched, but huge differences in the types of questions that were asked, where 67% of the questions asked of male founders were what's called promotional questions. How are you going to double your market share? Where are you going to hire your next 100 employees? And 66% of the questions asked of female founders were what's called prevention questions. How are you going to protect your clients from the competition? What if some of your key people leave?
Mhm.
And there was this huge bias. What she also found was that the women who answered those prevention questions with a promotional style of answer were 14 times more likely to secure funding. So it's kind of like politicians never answer the question you ask them. They just tell you what they want to what message they want to get across. And that's kind of part of what they've got to do. So that was number two. And then number three is that women tend to be much more conservative in their financial projections. And particularly where you're going out for venture capital, you've got to be showing that you have the possibility to shoot the moon.
Okay, so there's a number of things there. I mean, at the end of the day, though, there you are, you've founded Funding Focus. There's this startling, perhaps not surprising situation, but very worrying situation, in finance. What could you or anyone do about it, and how far have we got in terms of remedying that?
Not very far is the answer. Let me just quickly look up on the web. PitchBook statistics on the European VC female founders dashboard. So right now, the latest statistics from PitchBook, which is it's a Morningstar company, they gather in data from all of the venture capital firms. In 2025, all female teams have secured 1.4% of total funding. Mixed gender teams have secured 17.5%, so that's up. But there were a couple of mega deals in the fintech arena where one of the co-founders of the business was a woman, and that's led to that growing. But for female only, it's 1.4%.
The previous numbers that you gave me were less than 1, 10, and 89. And so it's shifted a little bit, but not much on the
Less
mixed
than
side.
1, 10, and 89. It's now
Yeah.
1.4, 75, and what? So it's 18.9, 80.1,
Okay.
81.1.
Okay. So there's still There's still lots to do. I mean, you've taken on
There's
quite a
still a
lot here.
lot to do,
Yeah.
a long way to go, and a lot of people are making noise. I mean, one of the other things that came out in 2019 was the Alison Rose review of female entrepreneurship. That led to something called the Investing in Women Code that a lot of banks have signed up to, but more than half of the venture capital firms still haven't. And there's now an Investing in Women task force, but I don't think they've achieved much. I actually worked with John, the founder of Huvo, the digital media and publishing group. John and I worked together throughout 2023 to try and raise a fund that was going to invest in female founders, but we were unable to get it away. So I'm aware of a number of other people who are trying to raise smaller funds, but they're only, they're struggling to get a fund of 5 or 10 million. And in the fund management world, that's a drop in the ocean.
I'm not suggesting that this would ever be a simple challenge and solution, far from it. But if there was one thing that either you, the corporate world, or policymakers could do to change that situation, is there one single action or change of policy or something that people could do? The Pareto kind of, 20% of the actions
Yeah,
make
yeah,
80% of the
yeah. No,
difference
no, I
kind of thing.
understand. Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting because I remember prior to last year's general election, the shadow city minister, Tulip Siddiqui, was talking about all the things that she was going to do to support female founders. And then she got into rather a spot of bother and had to stand down. So, on the policy side of things, sadly, not much has happened. I think one of the big challenges is that venture capitalists make a lot of money as long as they have good exits down the line. And they don't, a venture capitalist might raise a fund of 50 million and they'll invest 500,000 in 100 different companies. They know going in that 20 of those companies are going to go bust and 75 of them are going to become what they call zombies that just kind of tick over but don't really do anything. And the five that are left are the ones that make money and make all the money, especially if one of them becomes a unicorn, $1 billion company. That repays everything. That repays the carried interest. That pays all the expenses. That wipes out all the losses. Everybody makes a ton of money. And hey, aren't we the smartest people in the room? And so the problem is that the venture capital industry has very little incentive to change.
I want to ask you now about the role of writing in the development of your thinking, because obviously
Yep.
you've been talking about a couple of books you've written already, and I'm interested in the entrepreneurial journey in terms of the role that writing plays in that. Obviously, I'm a writer, and for me, it's a source of great clarity, almost a cathartic sort of process. Is it the same for you, or do you think, as you're writing, are you thinking of new solutions that perhaps you couldn't when everything was all jumbled up inside your head?
Less so. I'm more thinking about here's something that I can bring to the world, and putting it into a book really forces me to have absolute clarity. This is what it is. These are the benefits. And I've always, just from a personal style angle, I've always, when I'm doing a book, I build in stories of people I've worked with. So littered throughout both of my books are stories of female founders or stories, I do the whole, there's a case study in the middle of Add Then Multiply that's about 35 pages, and it's the entire Huvo story from when I joined the company, all seven private companies, the other public company, right through to when I left.
Hmm.
And I was fortunate that because it was a public company, I was able to share a lot of detail. And then when I was talking about exits, I was able to share less detail because they were often private company details, but some people were very kind and agreed that I could put their stuff in. Others didn't want their names mentioned, so I just anonymized them. But I built the stories as well as, here's the factual information, but here's a story that brings it to life.
Hmm.
And I remember in the fund chapter, I didn't have the story, and I was chatting with one of my test readers, and he said, "Well, just make one up then." So I just created this fictional company called ABC Limited that was started by Annabelle, Brian, and Charlie, and took them on their funding journey. And I used that in my second book as well. But that one was about female founders, so it became Annabelle, Bryony, and Charlotte. But the same thing. But people have said to me one of the things that they like the most about my writing is it's not just kind of heavy, boring stuff. You're telling stories. It's making it interesting. And as a result of that, with the first book, it won an award at the Business Book Awards.
Yeah. And I've been a judge on the Business Book Awards. Just for transparency to the listeners, I wasn't judging your category, so I can say this without fear or favour. But I heard good things from other judges about it. So, I, in terms of it as a marketing tool, I mean, has it been really good? Has it had a sort of Heineken effect of helping you reach the parts that other other founders
Un-
cannot reach, if you like?
Unquestionably, and not from selling the book, but from giving the book away. So when I had the book published, I ordered 1,000 copies from my publisher, and I'm now on my second 1,000 copies, and I have a target to give 5 to 10 books away a week. So when I'm talking to people, we're just upgrading something on my website where we used to have a thing on the website where you could get a free chapter, and we've decided to change it. You can have the book. It gives you credibility. It opens doors when I'm approaching someone who might be a very senior figure. I'll often say, I'm researching my next book and I'd like to interview you. And most people are delighted to take a call then. And then you can, just kind of weave the conversation around to whatever you want to say. But I mean, I don't lie because I am working on another book and I'm constantly looking at ideas and things. So yeah, I've found it to be a great tool. It's, back in the days when we used to meet people in person, which thankfully we're doing again. But it's a much, much more powerful thing than here's my business card. Would you like a copy? Here's not even would you like, here's a copy of my book. I'll sign it for you. I'll do a personalized message on the inside. People go, wow.
It's very impressive. I mean, let's talk about another side of running a business that we all, you talked about it yourself, that founders have to be prepared to sort of let go a little bit when we were talking about it in the context of funding. But in terms of you running your own business, I mean, what have you been good at and what have you been not so good at, in terms of running the business, the mechanics of running the business? Well, if people were sitting here, sort of colleagues or former colleagues would they say, David, he's great at this, maybe not so good at that?
Letting go is hard when you're the founder of a company. And, I look back over my journey over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, it was just me. 8 years ago, it was me and a fractional virtual PA. And today we're a team of 7 people full time. And so it was hard. But once I realized, when I let go, when I hire the right people and train them and show them the ropes and demonstrate what I need them to do, it's so freeing. It's unbelievable because all of a sudden you've got, you might have 3 things going on at the same time. Well, I can delegate that to my team. And so that was probably my biggest lesson. And that was something that I found very, very difficult at first. I'm still reluctant to let certain things go because I like them. But my business would be nowhere near where it is today if I didn't have a team of people. And I just got back from a month's holiday, and my wife and I were and like 2 years ago there were only 3 of us in the company. I got back from a month's holiday. We've now got 7 in the company, and my wife and I were reflecting. That's probably the least disturbed I've been on holiday from the business in the last 10 years because I've now got a team of people who know what they're doing, who know my clients, who are trusted by me, are trusted by my clients, and can deliver the work that they need to deliver.
And it's a very important lesson for, those amongst our listeners who are looking to scale their businesses. Now, many look for confidence and clarity through this podcast and other places as well. I mean, is there any advice finally that you would give to those either starting their first business or maybe in your case, you've also been juggling more than one business, for part of that time? Are there particular lessons? I mean, we've talked about one just there, but are there other things that if you've been tapping David back in 2002 on the shoulder and saying, here's a bit of advice for you, young David, what would that have
Yeah.
been?
So for people who are starting out, figure out and get evidence to prove that there's demand in the marketplace for what it is you're doing before you start spending money building it. I mean, again, it's different from how it was 20 years ago, but I remember going out and, getting business cards designed and buying letterhead, and it was all really exciting. And I've still got boxes and boxes of my original letterhead. And I mean, it's probably all been thrown away or used as drawing paper by my grandkids now. But you don't need to go out and do those things. You don't need to have a website on day one. You don't need to have, a huge amount of video content. You can build that over time. What you need to do is know that there are people out there who want what you are going to offer them and are willing to pay for it. That's lesson number one for anyone starting out. Take a restaurant. Rather than going out and securing a lease and spending $100,000 on a fit out and an amazing new kitchen and all of that, and opening your restaurant and nobody comes, go out and test in the marketplace. Maybe do some pop-up things, maybe go to some market stalls. If you've got something different and unique, test it out in the marketplace. How is it going? Do people want to do this? Will people like to get more? Start talking to the people who are that are queuing up if you're at a market stall. Hey, I'm thinking of opening a restaurant. Is that something you'd be interested in? Ask them for their email address so you can keep them informed on your development, and just build up evidence that supports the fact that actually there is demand in the market for what you're thinking of doing.
So does that mean that too many people get wrapped up or fall in love with what it is they are offering before they've taken that step to see
100%.
What's going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely 100%. And, when I left the auction business, I had my own little midlife crisis moment. I tried to launch a wine business, which was tremendous fun, but not very successful because I didn't know the wine industry. And I just, it had been a hobby. Wine has been a hobby of mine for years. And I went to night school and did my wine trade qualifications once I knew I was going to be leaving the business. And then, and I had a little black book of lots of people in the city. And I thought, well, they all make lots of money. They'll buy wine from me. And they didn't. So yeah, and that was a hard lesson. I mean, I burned $100,000 in 2 years.
And that must have been a very hard sort of lesson. Are there any other bits of advice that you'd want to pass on at all?
Once you've got some evidence that there is traction in the market for what you're doing, and it's starting to work and it's starting to build and it's starting to grow, stick with what you believe in. Start investing in yourself. Go out and learn from people who are smarter than you. Go out and learn from people who are more experienced than you. Go out and learn from people who've done this before. I love the quote from Steve Jobs. We hire smart people and then get out of the way so that they can do what they need to do. We don't tell them what to do. We hire them because they're smart and let them get on with it.
Well, what a fascinating conversation that was with David. I was struck by how clearly he explains complex ideas, whether that's why founders cling so tightly to control or why giving up a slice of ownership can actually help you grow faster and increase the value of what you keep. Then there's David's FACE model that stands for fund, acquire, consolidate and exit. And it came alive in our discussion, especially when he talked about the hardest part of all, consolidation. It's one thing buying a business, it's quite another blending cultures, teams and customers so that 1 + 1 really does become 3. And the examples he gave from tech to PR to public companies gave me a really vivid sense of why so many mergers struggle. His work with Funding Focus was also inspiring. The funding gap facing female founders is still shockingly wide, and hearing the numbers again underlines just how far we have to go. David's mission to level that playing field is not only important, it's long overdue. And then there's his practical advice for anyone starting or scaling a business. Test demand before you build. Invest in learning from people smarter than you. And if you want to grow, learn to let go. So thank you to David and thank you to all of our listeners and the great feedback we're getting on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast, look for me, Trevor Meriden, or our business Merriborn on merriborn.co.uk. That's all for this episode, and until the next time, thanks for listening.